They were a team.
Really?
It is now on air. Yes.
Is this
Right.
going to be turned into a library?
Yep.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is the library now.
What do you think? Sorry.
Oh, that's what
About
those books
YouTubing the Boundless Judaism course.
I think it's definitely a possibility. We have to check out the connectivity in the social hall, which is where we're planning to do it. Because
You wanna move it here?
well, it depends on the amount, and if we're trying to use the projector, we have a dinky projector that we can use in here, but it's nothing like the one we have in the social hall. So we can see whether or not we can stream it. But at the very least, we talked about recording the audio, so and yep, all that good stuff. All right, details, logistics. That is the wonderful segue for beginning our study into today's parasha of Tolodot, because although this is ostensibly about the life of Isaac, we are going to end up talking an awful lot about his two sons. I haven't given you a page number yet. This is the prelude to the introduction. Right, it's the prologue to the prelude to the introduction to the four pages of. Yeah. So, of course, the two sons of Isaac are going to be. There we go. Jacob and Esau, and as we know from the story, they get on just fine, right?
Oh, yeah, from the very beginning.
From the very beginning. Now, this is perhaps not surprising that they don't get on so well, since every pair of brothers since the beginning of the entire Torah have not gotten on so well, and even the next generation not going to get on so well. That whole, selling Joseph off into slavery thing. So it's all the way, in fact, until we get to the very end of the book of Bereshit that we finally see brothers who can get on with each other, which are Ephraim and Manasseh, which is why we bless our children, our sons, by Ephraim and Manasseh. In case you were wondering, who were these guys? They were the first two brothers who got on. That's why there aren't that many stories about them.
Oh, right, not interesting.
Exactly. It's a little boring when they are peaceful. So we need to uncover today the source of the contention between Jacob and Esau, because I would like to posit for you today that there is more being explained and told in the story than just the problem of. So I want you to hold that in your mind. We are going to begin at the beginning of Tolodot, which means we're on page 146 in the Eitz Chaim, and that's going to be chapter 25, verse 19. And please apologize. I apologize for my congestion, and bear with me for the sniffs throughout the class.
I'm sorry, what page did you say?
146. Right at the beginning.
It was wool gathering.
What's that? Well, how appropriate, as we're going to see. Are you volunteering?
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
This is the story of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took to wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and the Lord responded to his plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, "If so, why do I exist?"
Right, the plaintive cry of anyone who's had a difficult pregnancy, right? Lama li. Oh, why? Was I made for this?
She went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord answered her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger."
All right, so what we're getting here is a beginning of a prophecy that we are going to see Jacob turn into not just the man, but the people of Israel. And Esau is going to turn not just into the man, but the people of Edom. And these were two nations that were neighbors in the ancient Middle East. Israel was sort of, we generally think of as the heartland of Israel. And Edom was essentially south of that, in parts of the Negev and straddling the border with Jordan and Saudi Arabia. In less areas that we would consider hospitable. Petra, for example, if you know the city of Petra, would have been in the Edomite territory. Good? Onward.
When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first one emerged red, like a hairy mantle all over. So they named him Esau.
Connected to the Hebrew word for hair.
Here. Then his brother emerged, holding on to the heel of Esau, so they named him Jacob.
Connected to the Hebrew word for heel.
Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors. But Jacob was a mild man who stayed in camp. Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah favored Jacob. Once,
All right, we're going to pause there.
Okay.
All right, so what do we know about these two actual people, not the later nations? But what did we just learn about them?
One is a hunter.
All right, so we've got a hunter, which means that he brings in game.
Mhm.
And apparently Isaac likes the taste of game. No problem there,
no,
right? And what do we know about Jacob?
He stays mild.
Mild. It's a real interesting word. It's called tam, which can mean mild. It can mean innocent. It can mean perfect. It's a little ambiguous. But we know that unlike Esau, who is a man of the field, what they call the outdoor, but the outdoors doesn't mean field like agricultural field. It can mean just everything outside the camp. Jacob is a man of the tent. Well, let's be fair here. So Jacob often gets the wonderful appellation of being a mummy's boy, as you put it. And perhaps that's because it says that Rebekah prefers him to Esau. But does that necessarily mean that he's bad?
No.
Or that this is somehow, wrong, that he's not enough of a manly man? That is being a mummy's boy in this case a bad thing?
No.
And yet we often use the term mummy's boy as a negative, that somehow the person that is preferred by the mother is not as enough of a man as the one that is preferred by the father. And we're going to come back to this thing, not just between mother and father, but of what are these two people archetypes for in our broader story. But we need to get more of their character on the page so that we can analyze it a bit more fully.
Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the open, famished, and Esau said to Jacob, "Give me some of that red stuff to gulp down, for I am famished," which is why he was named Edom.
Coming from the word for red.
Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright."
All right, so let's make sure we understand. What is the birthright in biblical and indeed in all of the ancient Near Eastern lands? What does it mean to have a birthright?
It must be the right to inherit.
The right to inherit what?
The blessing, the land, the blessing, but I don't know that it means the blessing.
Not the blessing.
The
So,
land.
well, how much of the land?
Double portion.
A double portion, exactly. So it's very simple. The way it worked in most of the ancient Near Eastern cultures was that a father would divide his assets among his sons plus one. So if you had 4 sons, you would divide it up into 5 portions, and the oldest son would get 2 portions, and the other 3 sons would each get 1 portion. Make sense?
That sounds like it's guaranteed to cause problems.
Well, is waiting to see who dad likes more,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
he can give that person everything, a better solution?
No. Okay. All right.
I'm just saying, in our modern
It's true.
in our modern system of giving of inheritance, the father or mother, whoever is passing, can divide it however they feel like, and then leave it for the courts to decide for the arguments over the next 10 years, making lawyers very wealthy.
Yes.
Whereas in this case, it was sort of an established principle that the most the eldest could get would be twice as much as any of his other brothers, but it was still only that one additional portion of the entire amount, not half of everything if there were more than 2 brothers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was, yes, preferential to the eldest, but it was also a guaranteed system. So that's what's being sold here. So that extra portion, which means Esau is not giving up everything that he's ever going to inherit from his father. He's just giving that bonus piece to his brother rather than keeping it for himself. And he's selling it for the stew.
Is that typical to do that? Is that unusual?
Well,
To sell the birthright.
unfortunately, we don't have other examples within Tanakh, but we do have other examples from other ancient Near Eastern archaeological artifacts. There are passages from other ancient texts that talk about brothers selling the inheritance right. Now, why would you think, in general, why do you think someone would want to do that?
They don't want to run the farm. Your brother's better at it. Just give it away and you can get out, you can get off the land and go into the big city and do something else.
Oh.
I mean, I know there's no big city.
I was going to say, go to the big city where?
You know, if you're not interested in carrying on the family business, you might not want that double portion.
But you would still want what you could get for it.
Yeah.
Right, because remember, we're not talking about giving it away, we're talking about selling it. And so indeed, somebody might say, well, you know what, I would rather have the money now, or the your portion of the land, or the produce that will be reaped over the next few years, in exchange for the future promise, which will only come true once my father dies. Right, it's a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, quite literally in this case. Right, I'll take one now rather than two later. And that would be a reason for many people to do that. What's striking here, of course, is that it's going for the low bargain basement price of stew.
He was a million.
Isn't it more than just the monetary inheritance? Isn't it like being the head of the family
Well, it's
with the right to sit at the head of the Shabbos table?
it's debated exactly how much authority the eldest had, the firstborn had over the others. So maybe or maybe not. We don't have enough good examples of the social structure to know exactly how much primacy that birthright gave outside of just the material benefit. So it may have been, it may not have been, but in any case, it seems to be that in this case, that Esau is willing to trade it. Now, I believe you just said he must have been really hungry, right? Now, why would he have been hungry?
He was out hunting and doing stuff.
And he was out hunting, so what must have happened?
He didn't have time to cook something for himself.
Either he didn't have time to cook, or he missed.
Oh,
Right?
yeah, didn't catch him.
I mean, that's the thing when you're a hunter, is sometimes you go out and you catch a deer and you come back and you eat like a king. And sometimes you go out and you can't find a thing and you come back and you're hungry. And apparently we are dealing with a situation here where he came back and he didn't have anything. And so he smells the wonderful fragrance of what Jacob is cooking and says, you know what? Let's see what I can do here.
And Esau said, I am at the point of death. So of what use is my birthright to me? But Jacob said, and swear to me first. So he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob then gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, and he rose and went away. Thus did Esau spurn the birthright.
All right. Yes?
So why didn't Esau just take the stew? Why did he have to ask his brother to give it to him and start this whole thing?
You mean, why didn't he just beat him up and take it?
Not beat him up, but it's there in the pot. Just take the
Yeah, but Jacob's stirring it. Jacob's standing there stirring it.
Well,
And he
who
made it.
does the stew belong to?
It doesn't belong, it belongs to the family.
Well, apparently not. And that leads us to another question, which is, where was the other food in the house? I mean, this is the only food in the entire camp of Isaac. This is it.
I can't believe that's true. That's why it's separate. It was the food that was cooking. He wanted to go to the pot like we do. We walk in, let's take a little bit before dinner. No, he could have just done that and avoided all this.
But is that different when mom is cooking the stew because she's cooking it for everybody, or when Jacob's standing there by himself, he's making the stew? Now you're taking, maybe you're taking the thing that he was
I don't
making for
know.
himself,
I
didn't
just
want.
always
But it
wondered.
smelled so good. It was, he didn't even think about going to get anything else because it smelled so delicious as he walked in. Oh, just give me some of that.
Well, we're going to deal with the question of who owned the stew in just a few minutes. But I do want to point out that the alternative issue is very important here, which is, why didn't Jacob just give it to him?
Yeah.
I mean,
Why did he do that?
share and share alike, right? I mean, we're brothers.
Your brother's hungry.
Your brother comes in hungry from out in the field, from his hunting excursion, and you happen to have already cooked supper. Share a little. Why the extortion? Now, we know, because we've read the end, we've seen how the book comes out, spoiler alert, that Jacob is going to need to be the one who inherits and needs to be the one who has the land of Israel as his portion, because of his sons and the tribes and the continuation of our people. But at this moment, Jacob doesn't necessarily know that. At just this moment, Esau doesn't necessarily know that there's two brothers. And although we may think that Esau is behaving extremely impulsively here, and we're going to see not, actually, Jacob's behavior also seems to be extremely callous, of unkind, but also not. Because what we're going to get into is an argument between two different feelings, two different viewpoints on how life, how family, how society is organized. But we're going to get one sentence of the chapter 26 just to drive this point home.
There was a famine in the land.
Perfect. That's it. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that we knew that after this little escapade, we then hit into a famine. Okay. Because we have had a famine. Well, this is the third one that we've had so far. That's come along. There you go.
And down this way.
All right, so from rabbinic point of view, let's see what we can say about this guy Esau. And they're going to take very, very carefully the verses that we read, and they're going to pull apart each phrasing and magnify his character, right? Throw it into sharp relief. That we may have had a sort of a general outline of the man, but they're going to show us that if you look carefully at the phrasing of Torah, that you can know more about him. So, from the top, said Rabbi Yochanan.
Said Rabbi Yochanan, on that day, that wicked man
Which is Esau.
committed 5 sins.
But you didn't notice that, right? That whole passage we just read with the exchange about coming home and the soup and all of that, there were 5 sins that happened there.
He had raped a betrothed maiden. He murdered. He denied God. He denied the resurrection of the dead, and he spurned the birthright.
All right. Those are some pretty heavy sins. You all noticed the part where it said that he raped someone and murdered someone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not?
No.
Okay. Well, let's see how the Midrashic reading goes through verse by verse, or actually phrase by phrase.
So with regard to the rape, they find it in the line, he came in from the field.
The field, okay, in quotes.
Because I guess someplace else in Deuteronomy it says, but if the man find a damsel that is betrothed in the field, and the man take hold of her and lie with her.
Okay, so this is the laws later on that are given in Deuteronomy that pertain to the laws of rape and what you do with someone who has raped a woman. There it is set in a field. Here, Esau is coming in from the field. Field. That's all we need to make a connection. They didn't just field like it. Sorry.
Like it.
It's one of the laws of
Gevera Shava, exactly. It's one of the laws of hermeneutics that when you have 2 words that are used, or 2 identical words, that you can use the context of each to inform the other. So there we have. He's a rapist. Onward.
That he was faint means he murdered somebody. Because see, in Jeremiah it says, for my soul faints before the murderers.
Right. So he was ayef. He was weary. He was faint. He was, at the end of his energy. And that same word is used with regards to murder in Jeremiah, as you pointed out. Therefore, weary, faint, he must be a murderer.
He denied God. What benefit is this to me? And this is my God.
So this is a little bit less straightforward, but when he asks about the benefit of the birthright, when he's trying to weigh up his options, birthright, birthright, what he says is, lama zeli. Right? What is this to me? Like, what good is this to me? And since the sages took that birthright as being not just the birthright of the extra portion of inheritance, but the birthright of the covenant of Abraham, which means the connection to God, that he was therefore saying, Lama zeli, well, ze eli, this is my God, which means, by a little logical transposition, Lama eli li, what good is my God to me? Right? I'm here hungry. I'm starving. God didn't provide me with anything to eat, which, remember, he will say that God did provide him when he goes out to find stuff for, which Jacob will say that God did provide for him when he comes back early with the goats, when he's trying to trick his father Isaac later on in the Torah portion. So here, the rabbis are reading that Zeh is actually Eli, my God, and therefore, Lama Elili, what good is my God to me? Therefore, God isn't providing for me. I might as well provide for myself by selling this birthright, even though with it comes the connection to God. I know it's a little scratching left ear, right hand, but it does work on a level.
He denied the resurrection of the dead because he said, behold, I am going to die.
That seems self-evident. The rabbis don't even bother bringing extra explanation. Right. Well, what's he saying here? Why do I care about my birthright if I'm going to die? Because if this is it, then who cares whether I sell my birthright or don't? Because I have no interest in a spiritual ongoing, because I don't believe there will ever be a spiritual ongoing thing, right? It's now or never for life. And as such, the objective should be to maximize now, right? Instant gratification is better than delayed gratification, because delayed gratification may never get here. Now, if you believe that there is Olam Haba, if you believe that there is a resurrection and a world to come, then eternity versus now is a much easier sell. But if you deny it, then now is all you've got, and you want to grab what you can now. Everyone following that? Okay, onward.
And he spurned the birthright, because what I had just read. So Esau despised his birthright.
Right, as it says clearly in the Peshat of the text. Clearly the Torah is condemning him for his choices, for choosing to sell the birthright for this pot of stew. But what the Torah is also hinting at is something about the nature of Esau as, let's put it in quotes, as an archetype. That Esau represents something more than just himself. And I'm not even just talking about ethical. We've talked about that before in previous lessons. But something here more sociological. Esau is the archetype of the hunter society, the hunter-gatherer society. This is the foundation of all human civilization, if you can call it that, right? 12,000, 20,000, 40,000 years ago, everybody on Earth was a hunter-gatherer. And how did those societies work? Anyone? You guys don't remember your Western Civ classes? You jump straight to the agrarian river valley civilizations?
It was all about, this is mine. What's mine is mine. Kind of society.
Well, actually, it was, and this is what's odd, is the hunter-gatherer societies, at least of those that we've been able to study in modern times, that were still unaffected by civilization in some of the remote parts of the world, seem to have a number of inbuilt apparatuses to prevent too much accumulation for any individual. And there was a sense of sharing and camaraderie within them. By and large, I mean, every culture has its own unique features, but by and large, the hunter-gatherers needed to be communal. Excuse me, squeak across the board. They needed to be communal, they needed to be fair, they needed to be small, and they needed to be mobile, right? There was a type of egalitarianism built in, simply because of the fact that you had to be mobile, which meant that nobody could accumulate more wealth than what they could carry. Right? What's your mansion going to do for you when the herd goes off this way? Your mansion is staying here. So yes, there were people who could have more respect if they had earned it in the eyes of the community. There were people who could have more wealth in the sense of, nicer clothes or whatnot. But again, it was what they were wearing. It wasn't what they had in their closet, because their closet didn't move with them. And when you were out and going and on the hunt or gathering, you had to trust and you had to be willing to share with everyone else in the group, right? I'm going off to get the wildebeest and you're going off to get the berries. When we're done, we come back and then we divvy them up. Because if we don't, then we're going to starve, because I'll have too much protein, you'll have too much of the other vitamins, and then that doesn't work. And we don't want to continue to dicker over each one, but this only works in a fairly small group. You can't have a hunter-gatherer society of 10,000 people that are all connected. And we're going to come back into that later, okay? But obviously, this is not what Jacob is. Jacob is all about the tent and the flocks and the encampment life, which is not going out and getting. Now, someone like Esau, who seems to be viewing the hunter-gatherer, may have resented Jacob for his sedentary lifestyle. After all, what are you doing, right? You're not going out and getting. You're just sitting here stirring stew. That's not contributing the same way. And when Esau came back, he may have felt, I've been out hunting. Okay, fine, I didn't get anything today, but I did yesterday. I might tomorrow. And you need to share with me, like I share with you, what I bring back from the hunt. And Jacob is saying, no, that's not the way it's going to work. Because Jacob represents the transition to the pastoral or agrarian societies.
Okay. Another distinction might be that Esau, his society to immediate gratification. They lived hand to mouth.
Absolutely. You have to live hand to mouth because you can't store anything anywhere.
And Jacob's being the template for the agrarian society, he delayed gratification. You plant, you reap, you sow.
Exactly right. Exactly. Jacob as an agrarian or as a pastoral, let's start with pastoral first. Pastorals are societies that begin to develop around animal husbandry, like shepherds or herdsmen. And rather than chasing the herd, you grow your own herd. And then you just take from it as you need. So you don't have to move with the herd. You move as it grazes. So you're semi-nomadic, but you're not worried about having to pick up and go tomorrow. Because you can plan when you need to take the sheep up to which pasture and when you bring them down again, when you need the herd to go to this area across the river or when you bring them back again. That gives you much more ability to control and plan your food supplies. And as Michael was pointing out, that is the prerequisite for being able to have delayed gratification. I'm not going to sit down and go, look, I've got 100 sheep. That means I'm going to have the best party ever. I'll just kill them all right now, and I'm going to have just a pile of meat. You say, no, I'll have a sheep today. And after lambing season, I'll know how many new sheep I'm going to get, and then I'll be able to anticipate how many more we're going to eat, depending upon how many people we are and which festivals we'll do it in. And we'll regulate our lives so that we have a nice, steady flow. And this will allow us to avoid the ups and downs, the feast or famine of the hunter-gatherer society.
That's so boring.
What's that?
That's so boring.
That's so boring. And it's also so limiting because you need a great deal of control for this to work. You need someone to say, I don't care how hungry you are, you're not allowed to go out and kill a sheep and eat it from the flock, because that's our flock. And that flock is all we've got, and we need to stretch it until we get to the new lambing season, and then we have spares, and then we can have more of the meat. But you don't just get to say, I'm hungry today, I'm going to go eat a cow. And the hunter doesn't get that. The hunter says, hey, if it lives and breathes, I can kill it, I can eat it, and I can do it today because I'm hungry today. And who knows what next week is going to be like, let alone next year or 5 years from now. I want it, and I want it now, and it's here. And we see these two personalities coming through in Esau and Jacob. And, well, we'll get there. But there's a problem, because there's an implicit promise within the pastoral agrarian society that is the enticement to the hunter. It's the implicit promise that we give, for example, to pets, which is why when we invite a dangerous animal into our house, like a cat or a dog, we're making a deal with them, which is, you don't eat me in my sleep, and tomorrow morning I'll operate the magic can opener, right? And there will be a constant flow of food, and we'll work together, and you'll get the mice, or you'll help me hunt, or you'll protect my sheep, and I'll continue to feed you. And that's the deal. What happens when the can opener stops? How loyal do cats stay, for example? Yeah. They go looking somewhere else. Exactly. Boom, I'm out of here, right? There is zero loyalty if that promise doesn't get fulfilled. If the promise of steady food isn't there, then all bets are off. And what do we have here is a breach of that trust, right? Esau comes back and says, okay, where's that steady food you promised me? And Jacob says, oh, it's here, but it comes with a price. That you don't just get free food. That's not the way it works. That may work kind of in your hunter-gatherer mind, but that's not the way it works here. There's got to be an exchange, because everything has value and everything has to be planned and regulated. And that means they're going to pay for it. And then when we hear about a famine coming right after it, that's an even bigger problem between the two of them. And Esau knows that. And there's at least one sage, Ibn Ezra, who believes that that's exactly why Esau was so willing to sell for so little. So if we can read the Ibn Ezra quote.
Esau scorned the birthright because he saw that his father wasn't wealthy.
Right. So to come back to your question, Michael, before of, well, what, this is the only stew in the entire encampment, at least according to Ibn Ezra? Yeah, that's right. Isaac wasn't a wealthy man at this point in their life.
Now, many are confounded by this, for Abraham left Yitzchak a lot of money.
Right. Abraham was blessed in all things. And when he dies, we hear about him giving gifts to all of his other sons as well as to Isaac. So it seems like Abraham was loaded and now Isaac isn't. So what?
It's as if they never saw in their lives someone who was wealthy in his youth and came to poverty in his old age.
Because, yeah, we've never seen that happen, right? We've never seen anybody who was born, silver spoon in the mouth and ends up not doing so well by the time they're all elderly. Of course that can happen, is what Ibn Ezra is saying. So why should we be surprised that might have happened to Isaac as well?
Because the evidence is that Yitzchak loved Esau because of his need.
Right? So why did it say that Isaac was so in love with Esau? Because of the game, the food that he hunted and brought to his mouth? Because that's what he ate. Without that, he would have been hungry. It wasn't just that Isaac liked the taste of freshly hunted animals. It was freshly hunted animals were the only meat Isaac was getting. And so the hunter, in the time when the pastoral and agrarian is not providing, the hunter becomes king again. Because if you can hunt, you can now bring in food. At least you can. I mean, these guys, the pastoral agrarian, when things go south, you got nothing. That's why your cat leaves you.
And if bread was plentiful in Esau's father's house, and he was honored in his eyes, he wouldn't have sold his birthright for a stew.
Right? This is more evidence even Ezra's giving of the poverty of Isaac's household at the time. Because if he was wealthy, Esau would have just gone to the next tent and said, hey, I'm my father's favorite. Give me food.
And if his father ate delicacies every day, then why did Yitzchak say, bring me game?
Right? When we get to the very end, when we do the deception of Isaac for the blessing, if he was always eating nice food because he was wealthy, then he wouldn't have needed some special food to help motivate him for the highest form of blessing. It would have just been any other day with, a lovely full fridge. But apparently, according to Ibn Ezra, Isaac wasn't that wealthy. So in order to muster his full strength, he needed something for his mustard.
And why didn't Yaakov have choice garments, such as the ones that Rivka gave, because Rivka gave him those of Esau, or such that we see he lacked them in the next Pasha?
Right. Remember, he gets dressed in the deception later on in Esau's garments, and even Ezra's arguing that's not just to mask his scent, but that is also to show that he was Esau, because only Esau, as the favorite son, had expensive garments. No one else could afford them. The same way that only Joseph got the coat of many colors.
And why did his mother not give him silver and gold on the road, such that he said, and you give me bread to eat and clothing to wear?
Right, when he's making his deal with God, that is to say, Jacob's making his deal with God, he's asking just for the basic necessities. If they were so wealthy, when he left to go back to Haran to get a wife, why didn't he go with his pockets full of gold and with a backpack full of food? Because they didn't have any.
And how come she did not send him to great wealth if she loved him, such that he was compelled to watch the sheep?
Right? I mean, he has to work as a shepherd when he goes to Lavan, and he's 7 years to pay for his bride. Couldn't he have just wired home and said, met a nice girl, send 20,000 shekels for the wedding? If they didn't have 20,000 shekels, no. That would be the only way he'd be able to get her.
And the pasuk that said, and the man became great, that was before his old age.
Meaning Isaac, when it says Isaac became great.
And the blind of heart believe that wealth is a positive aspect for tzedakah. And behold, Eliyahu will disprove this.
Right, Eliyahu disproved this means Eliyahu is among the most righteous of the righteous, and Eliyahu was poor of poor. So you shouldn't think that if you're righteous, you'll be rich. That's not the way the world works, says Ibn Ezra. So the fact that Isaac might have been poor is not a knock against Isaac, it's just the way it was, again, in his argument. Now, whether or not Isaac was poor or not is hotly debated among other commentators. This is not the only view. There are many that have answers to all of these questions that allow Isaac to retain his wealth. But for the purposes here, I want to bring it as a contrast between these two lifestyles, because wealth in the pastoral agrarian sense is the advantage that they offer to the hunter-gatherer, right? The idea that we can have a storeroom full of food rather than just what did you catch today is the great enticement. But if at this moment Esau comes home and the agrarian system ain't working, it's not providing, then we can understand his behavior much more clearly. Because he's a man who hunts, and he says, all right, fine, look, I came home and there's nothing here. So what exactly is an extra portion of this going to be worth me when my father dies? Right? An extra portion of the pastoral agrarian society that doesn't have anything in the storeroom, that doesn't have anything that I can eat except what my brother's trying to sell me, and my brother's trying to sell me, you know? Forget this. Give me it today. You can have this lifestyle, and I'm heading out to the fields. I'm heading out to the wild places. That's where I'm going to live. And indeed, that's what we see ends up happening with Esau. When he shows up later on with his band of armed men, he becomes a hunter-gatherer of a slightly different sort. That is to say, more hunting and gathering on the pastoral agrarian societies, right? Becoming a raider, a bandit type personality. Rather than hunting sheep, you hunt the people who have the sheep. And then it's much, much easier than actually chasing down your own herds. And that seems to work pretty well, right? Because now you have some reliability and you have the ability to take what you want. And as we read this wonderful line from Isaiah, you know, kill cattle and slaughter sheep, meaning kill your flocks, eat them all, right? Eat meat and drink wine, eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. If you didn't know that came from Isaiah,
I did not.
Drink that.
now you know. Eat and drink, be merry, because tomorrow we die. The merry part gets sort of added in, but the idea here is blow your bank account today. Because after all, who knows what tomorrow will bring? The bank account being the cattle and the sheep, right? Why should you delay the pleasure of eating this cow for months or perhaps a year when I'm hungry today? And we see historically a problem here. This is some very interesting archaeology that's been coming out lately, if you'll indulge me for a little bit. Because most of us, when we were younger, and we learned about the great civilizations of the world, of Egypt and Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley and the Valley of the Yellow River in China, we learned about the great river societies, right? The great river valley societies. As this, ringing any bells for ancient world civilization classes way back in, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. And the whole idea of you had these remarkably advanced civilizations springing up almost overnight across the world. Well, archaeology has actually been showing us that 10,000 years before that, there were Neolithic giant villages that had thousands of people living in them as well. And that this was a shift from the hunter-gatherer to the pastoral agrarian 10,000 years prior to what we thought might have happened. And then they collapse. And then they reappear in the great river valleys, and that's where our civilization story brings up. But in this 10,000s of years prior to what we thought, people were living in some of these areas in much larger numbers for a long period of time in some cases than we ever believed humans were capable of doing. And their collapse has been a bit of a mystery for archaeologists. So some archaeologists have posited that it was climate change, that it was environmental conditions made it unfavorable to stay together in that kind of aggregate super village sort of model. But there are some other more recent hypotheses as well that I think are worth bringing into our discussion. Okay, so set your mind back into Neolithic. Forget what you think you know about Stone Age, cavemen. We're not talking about people who were walking around, going, and grunting and clubbing people and dragging women off by their hair. We're talking about human societies, human groups that had begun as small hunter-gatherer bands that coalesced and began building huts and wattle and adobe type villages that ended up with thousands and thousands of people. Much like if you look at some of the artist renditions based on the archaeology, if you were to look at some of the areas of Rio de Janeiro or Sao Paulo or in Delhi, the small huts that are in the slums. So just thousands and thousands of little family huts, little family hovels, if in modern terms, but all pretty much the same. No giant ziggurats, no massive temples, no palaces, just a enormous village. Ostensibly of equals. Okay, so let's look at some of the benefits for doing this.
Okay,
on the back.
So hunter-gatherer systems need as much as 3 square miles per person.
Right, so if you have 30 people living in your group, you need 90 square miles of roaming terrain to be able to provide enough food for them on a daily basis. That's a big circle of area.
Pastoral and later agrarian societies were 10 to 100 times more productive, depending on the quality of the land.
Right. So if you're in a good area and the land is rich and fertile, or you're in an area that allows you to raise the sheep or cattle very, very easily, then you can get a much higher yield for the same amount of land than if you were a hunter-gatherer. Right? Because if you're a hunter-gatherer, you don't know where you're going to find the sheep when you wake up in the morning. You don't know where you're going to find the berries. If you're a pastoralist, you know that your sheep are out in the pen, and you know that your berries are in the farm. And so you're able to cultivate much more densely and much more efficiently. And because you're actually cultivating rather than just leaving it to random chance, you can make a much greater yield for the same amount of space and the same amount of energy. And human society has always been about, how do I get the most calories for the least calories spent? I know nowadays people go on treadmills for fun, but back then, that was the opposite, right? It was, I want to do as little work as possible and get as much food for it. Sorry. So this becomes our major selling point for having everybody come together is, hey, when we work together on this, we can all do so much better with much less work. And that means more of us can survive. There's more food for all of our children. We can have bigger families, and everything's coming up roses.
Archaeological evidence demonstrates that the appearance of food production corresponds with three critical patterns in the archaeological record. One, a radical improvement of the predictability and scheduling of plant availability.
Right, so being able to schedule and predict when food is going to come and how much you're going to get means you can transform your society.
Two, an increased capacity for food storage.
Because all of that food doesn't mean anything if you have no way to store it, because every surplus would then be wasted.
And three, a growth in the potential maximum size of individual communities in the entire region.
Right. If you can store the food and you can predict how much you're going to have, then having bigger families and staying together works. And you end up, of course, then having exponential growth for that area and its human population. Civilization. And this is all pre-pottery, by the way. This is ancient times. Wow. Okay, but there are some problems.
Communities dealt with the new challenges of emerging systems of food production, food surpluses, labor needs, and increased social crowding and population aggregation by continuing existing and developing new social mechanisms for maintaining communities through the reiteration of social leveling mechanisms.
Okay, academic ease, isn't it great?
Oh,
Yeah, and you thought that Talmud was hard.
Yeah.
So what the author is trying to say in this is that the early hunter-gatherer societies that began to aggregate into these super villages that were now becoming pastoral and agrarian used the same techniques that worked in the hunter-gatherer society to try and maintain a stable super village society. And that becomes a problem because you've got things now with food surpluses. You got, the issues of who's going to do what, who's going to go dig the aqueduct or who's going to build the wall of this new hut. All of these labor issues and the fact that we're all crowded together rather than spread out in much, area and much higher dispersal rates than we are used to. That they tried to solve this by the same way that they did the issues in the small groups, in the small bands of, say, 100 people, which is, well, we just all share, right? We just all work together. And as long as everyone is cooperative, then it's okay, which is true, right? If everyone knows everyone and everyone is willing to respect everyone else's contribution to the tribe, to the clan, then me sharing my nuts with you today and you sharing your gazelle with me tomorrow, and you're good at building the spearheads and I'm good at making fire, and we all just share and chip in and it's all works out, makes a lot of sense. But when you get up to 1,000 family units into a larger super village, those mechanisms don't work so well because I don't know you anymore. And I don't know what your contribution is to the group. And so why should I share my nuts with you? I mean, because my sharing my nuts with you may mean you're now able to share your flint with this guy over there, who shares it with someone over there, who shares it with over there and over there and over there. And it eventually comes back to me, but I don't see that. And I don't feel that. And so instead, the author hypothesizes that they tried to keep things on that same sort of system, which is, well, let's just share everything, okay? Let's just be communal about this, and it will all be fine. And apparently, according to this hypothesis, that didn't work out so well, which is why these super villages collapsed. By the way, what do we now do for helping us understand and overcome these issues?
Yeah, government.
We have government, and we have an economy, right? And those are inventions. Those are decisions that we willingly agree upon, that we want to have happen. And we even agreed upon, having kings and all of that. I know it didn't always feel that way, but because they had swords and maybe the peasants didn't. But at least at the start, there was an agreement that, okay, we need to have someone in charge, or we need to have a way of having some way of showing the value of each person's contribution, what would become barter, and then what would later be called money, right? So that when I sell you my nuts and you take money, or I take that money and I buy something, who buys it and buys it and buys it and buys it, and comes back around and you get the cash back in that whole economic system, then we all feel fine about it because we all respect the value within the currency or within the trade that we did. And there's no resentment, even though I don't know you. So both government and economic systems allow us to live with thousands of other people who we don't know, and thousands of other people whom we may not care about yet. And we see Jacob using that technique. His brother comes in, says, I want some of that stew. And what does he do? He sells it to him. He says, if you want this, you have to give me something in value and a value in exchange. That's the way it's going to work. It's not just feed and feed alike. Now, Judaism blunts that, of course, with the systems of tzedakah and of helping of those who are in truly desperate need. But we start off with a system that does have exchange of value as its core. And that's why there's so much of Jewish law that is governed by the issues of who owns what, and what are the labor laws, and what are the contract laws, and what sales are valid and what sales are invalid. So we end up eventually, I've erased it, we end up eventually siding with Jacob's side against the Esau. Because although it's seductive to imagine we can all sit together, we can all share, we can all contribute equally, that only works in a very, very small, small group community. Okay, onward.
Okay, the abandonment of these large aggregate villages between 8,000 and 7,750
Before pottery.
before pottery. Oh, wow. May well have been related to changes within a broader set of ritualistic and social beliefs, in combination with regional environmental changes and local environmental degradation.
Right, because they didn't exactly have good EPA policies for these 1,000 people super villages 10, 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So they probably did begin to strip some of the fat of the land away, and it was harder and harder to maintain a good society off of it.
Move on.
But the ritual and social aspects are what we're going to focus on.
In particular, I would emphasize 4 possible interrelated social processes of change, including 1, the inherent limitations of Neolithic social organization to cope with increasing population aggregation, conditions of social crowding, and scalar stress.
Right, so when you have 100 people in your little clan, and then you move to 1,000 people in the clan, it's not just 10 times harder to keep everybody happy and not, killing each other. It is 1,000 times harder to keep everybody happy, right? It doesn't just go up arithmetically. That the operative principles that work in a small group don't work. They break down when they are put into a much larger organization. So you can't just size up whatever you're doing. And people who run small businesses will see this as well, right? If you're running a small mom and pop shop, and then you decide to open up a franchise, or you decide to become a full department store, you don't just do more of what you were doing for a bigger facility. You have to introduce all sorts of new layers of management and of controls and of oversight in order to make things work, right? Right, well, it happens in societies too.
2, the influence of scalar stress in diminishing the ability of house, ritual, and economic leaders to effectively manage and organize all segments of the community.
right? So fine, if you got 100 people, then the clan house, sort of the chief, the wise person, whatever you want to call it, the shaman of your clan, they can manage that small group. But as soon as you get beyond a certain point, you need institutions and hierarchies and all sorts of other ways to govern it. We see that with Moses when he comes out of Egypt and he's trying to be the chief of everybody in the entire area. And Jethro says, it doesn't work like that, man. That works fine if you got a family of 70. That doesn't work if you got 600,000. If you got 600,000, you got to organize, and you're going to have some form of hierarchy. Again, hierarchy does not necessarily mean oppressive. Unfortunately, that word's come to have that as a connotation. Hierarchy just means you have an order of authority, and you need to have that if you want to have things work beyond just a group of friends or clan or house system.
And 3, the emergence of politically, economically, and socially more powerful houses or lineages characterized by greater access and control of some resources and privileges.
So this is something that the archaeologists begin to see before the end of these super villages, which is the accumulation of wealth. That now that you're settled down and you're not carrying stuff on your back, it becomes possible for one house, one family, one clan within these super villages to get ahead. And that, as we know from our own modern society, creates social tension, right? Why should Grundar have, more bone tools than I do? It's not fair. And in a hunter-gatherer society, they're right. And it's not fair that Grundar has more bone tools because Grundar is not going to contribute to the clan better with more bone tools than sharing them out. But in this pastoral agrarian society, eventually, with the right social apparatus in place, it will be okay for some people to have more than others as long as everyone has enough. But they hadn't developed the social language to make that work yet. And so it collapses.
Right. And 4, the overall effect of the complex interplay between these factors in challenging the fundamental rationale for the existence of this ritual system and the group of people who controlled it.
Right. We all came together so we could all be better. Right? That's why we're having the super village. So if we're not all getting better, then I'm leaving. And I'll, if me being here means I end up having to give you so much, or I don't get much because you've taken it all, that I'm no better off than if I was out looking for berries on my own every day, then I'll go out and look for berries on my own every day. I'll have more free space. I'll be in control of myself, and I'm not going to be crowded into this giant slum of a Neolithic village. And until we developed a society that prevented that from becoming the case, these super villages would rise and kept collapsing. And the archaeological record shows that this happened for thousands and thousands of years before the great river valley civilizations finally took hold. And what Torah tried to do, I believe, is say, yes, and, meaning that, yes, we need an organized and we do need a cohesive system that allows people to work together with others that they don't know, but it also has to be balanced and mitigated by justice, by tzedakah, by chesed, by kindness, and by all of the other values that Torah embodies. And that's ultimately what it meant to be the final form that Jacob would be, which is Israel. And he was a little, I think, too agrarian pastoral versus his hunter-gatherer brother in the beginning, and eventually he gets it. And then the growth of Jacob over the next couple parshiot is really, I think, meant to be partly a metaphor, because our ancestors knew this as well. They knew what it was like to be a hunter-gatherer, what it was like to be a shepherd, and what it was like to be a farmer. And they expressed some of these tensions in ways that made sense to them, that I think most of us now, because we're so far removed from all 3 of those lifestyles, are missing. But it's essentially, how do we organize our communities? How do we organize our societies? How do we all work and live together and not kill each other, and be able to produce more for everyone in a way that is good for everyone? And well, that's pretty much the story of civilization there.
Wow.
Okay, any questions, comments? All right, I'm going to go home and have some chicken soup. You think I'm joking? Penelope made me chicken soup.
It's got enzymes in it.
Is there class next week?
And what's that? There is no class next week. Thank you for reminding me, Edie. No class next week. Nope, I have Wednesday off with my family.
Thanksgiving. Wednesday is not Thanksgiving. Thursday.
Now, Wednesday's not Thanksgiving, but my children are off on Wednesday, and I'd like to spend the day with them.
Oh,
Excellent.
I
You were
hear I
talking
was gonna stay
earlier
home.
about the temperature and cold.